Welcome back for Chapter 6, Section 3B. This is the last slide that was up there. Remember I told you we were looking at the layers of the grasslands and we're looking at the bottom layer here. Would have liked to have added the next slide to this because it shows you some pictures of this, but I really was short on time, so let me just do that quickly. So just to continue what we were saying, if we're looking at the lower herb layer here, we see that we have plants like wild strawberries. You might have some mosses growing. You also might have, a little slowing coming in there, you also might have some lichens. And this depends a little bit on temperature because these are usually associated with a colder temperature in here. Okay, and when we look at this, of course, you recognize these things, the dandelion. So the lowest layer of the grasses, down next to the earth, you would see these 4 examples of plants that you might see growing there. Okay, let's look at that middle layer. And remember, now we're working our way back up. So you remember we said, and I told you not to take notes on this, but the herb layer itself is divided into sections. You're going to see some plants that are a little bit taller. Okay, I think that makes some sense to you. And then when we get into the next layer, the upper herb layer, of course, you're going to see things that are even taller yet. So you probably have seen grasslands like this, and you probably have noticed some of these types of plants growing there. And again, if you're the one who happens to have, or you're the group that happens to have the grasslands, you can probably get some very good ideas from this presentation just to show you the kinds of things to talk about. Okay, let's continue now with the animals. Remember, we were looking at the biotic factors in the grassland. Of course, they're grasses. But now we're looking at the animals. They focus in on a couple here. They, of course, don't do everything in this slideshow. But they talk about, again, the prairie. We're not talking about the grasslands around the world. We're talking about the American prairie. And the American bison is probably the animal that has the best known reputation for traveling across the grasslands itself. They also focus here, which I'm glad they do, on how the bison has pretty much disappeared. They tell you what, in the past you had 45 million until our settlers moved through and slaughtered these. And now you might find some herds of bison roaming the grasslands, but not that many. They're mostly on ranches. Okay. What the bison I think, kind of did that some people don't even realize or unaware of is that they actually are the animals that helped the trees not be in the prairie. Okay, because they would destroy the prairie when they would rub against them. They kind of scratched themselves against the bark of the tree, but it actually killed off the tree. They didn't need the tree necessarily for survival, but interestingly enough, they destroyed the trees in the process. That gave you that flat looking kind of prairie that we're used to seeing again when you look at old TV westerns. Okay. Person had a good time with this slideshow. Kind of find some interesting animations in here. 1888, again in the United States, there were only 6 bison left of all of those that were roaming across the United States. The settlers, when they came in, just did not take care with the fact that they just destroyed them. There were none in Canada, but in the United States only 6. So the United States took some measures to stop that process and to protect them. Okay, so we'll talk later on about endangered species and things of that sort. But since we're talking about grasslands, they happen to throw all of this into the mixture here and show you, of course, there's a Native American, and they killed bison as well. Difference was the numbers that they killed. Difference was how they used them. If you take our social justice class here at North, we do a section on the Native Americans, and we talk a little bit about this. But anyhow, you can see they're, kind of furry creatures. Of course, they're there in the very far western grasslands. You notice all the short grass that we talked about earlier. Okay. Picture again of some of the devastation that took place. Looks like this was taken in the, I don't know, probably right after photography became about. This one's a sketch, but this is looks like it might actually be a photo. Person standing here, so you get a size of the hill of this, the size of this hill. And you see at the very top another person standing, a little bit hard to see, but he's holding up a head of a bison, and these are all the skulls. So when we talk about the devastation that took place in this particular prairie land, we were talking something that was pretty heavy. Okay, for that many skeletons to exist in one place gives you a sense of the kind of devastation that took place. Okay, another living creature that's an animal on the grasslands is the antelope. Okay, and these also unfortunately became almost extinct. You don't need to note all of this here, just the fact that they did exist on the American prairie. And again, as it sums up at the very end, they were near extinction, but the government stepped in. Okay, sorry. Okay, and if you've never seen an antelope, if you've never been to the zoo, kind of what you're looking at, there they are in their native habitat, and then there you see some of the causes of extinction. Okay, so looking again for some of the animals that are on the prairies, we have things like the white-tailed deer, the mule deer, and the elk. Okay, all related to each other, as you can tell from the pictures. Okay, then looking at some of the other animals, you also have things like the bears that live there, the grizzly bear pictured in the cartoon at the bottom there, the lynx in the cat family. Also you have coyotes, bobcats, cougars, and they followed the bison and the antelope around because they were predators for those animals. Okay, so a picture of a bobcat, cougar, and a wolf. Okay, smaller animals, scavenger animals, ones that came in after the big ones did the killing. These are two different kinds of foxes. We'll talk about the ears when we talk about the desert, but you can see that they're adapted to the short grass that's there and also the low rainfall and in some cases the amount of heat that's there. Even smaller animals, working our way down the sizes of these animals, these biotic factors on the grasslands, you would have things like a ground squirrel, pretty much looks like our squirrels around here, prairie dog, remember we said they were burrowing animals, so you can see them in their holes there, and then of course you have mice, which are also animals that burrow. So in addition to that, they've listed some of the other animals that exist on the prairies: jackrabbits, weasels, badgers, skunks, shrew, cottontail rabbits. Okay, look at the size of those ears, kind of neat. Again, remember these animals are all pretty much burrowing. Again, you see that with the badger, he's coming out of his hole there, and kind of have to stay because of where they live, close to the ground. Okay. Okay, this particular slideshow gets some more into the extinction idea here. The fact that the Great Plains grizzly bear, the Great Plains wolf are extinct. Now, that's not all bears. Okay, please note that's a Great Plains grizzly bear and Great Plains wolf. Okay, elk are still alive, but they've run out of the prairie. Mule and white-tailed deer are almost near extinction. Moose, black bears vanished. Okay, again, you don't need to take notes, but just keep this in mind. Those of you doing the prairie, take the notes from here. Those of you not doing the prairie, get some ideas from here, kinds of things that you could add into your presentations for your project, and get a sense of what was going on here in the United States and see if you can apply it to the particular biome that you were assigned to research. Okay, then they're going to show you some pictures of these organisms. Well, Hunter here. Okay. So hunting, ranching brought about the extinction of several of these. Others were just forced to relocate, just to move. Okay, and then due to their adaptations, they were able to survive when they relocated. I'm going to skim over this. Do not take notes on this, okay, but it's not a bad sense. That earlier chapter we had about adaptation gives you a sense of how adaptations are important when animals are forced to relocate. So things like long distance vision, okay, helped some organisms survive, but camouflaging colors helped others to survive. We talked about that earlier, so I'm not going to ask you to take notes on this. I'll just finish going through this. The fact that some organisms can remain motionless, I'm sure you've seen that even in rabbits around this area, but definitely true for some of the ones in the prairies where they're going to be more visible to start with. Okay. And then again, we didn't talk about birds in any of these. They didn't mention this, but the birds are very well adapted to live in the prairies. And, their nests are nicely concealed in the grasses, and sometimes they take over some of the homes from some of the other organisms, you know, like if like a duck here, for example, can live in some of the holes that are there, maybe even a former badger hole or something. Pictures of the birds, just quickly to add to your list of organisms in the prairie: the meadowlark, bobolink, sparrow, longspur, lark bunting. Okay, all just different types of birds. And you see how they kind of blend nicely into the short grasses that exist there. Okay, continuing with the birds there, the sage grouse, look at the difference, a little bit bigger here. And then the prairie chicken, and then the sharp-tailed grouse. Okay. This last section, last few slides, go into the human impact, and I do want you to pay some attention to this. For your projects, you need to consider what is the human impact on the biome that you are studying. So this slideshow does a nice presentation on that and talks about how humans have changed the grasslands. So now they're basically food producing areas, cattle raising ranches. And I think this was mentioned earlier that the tall grass prairies have become used for corn and wheat, mixed grass for growing grains, and the short grass are even today overgrazed and improperly cultivated. Now, you don't need to know all that specifically, other than to know that the humans have had an impact on the grasslands, primarily because we've changed it into farmland and changed it into grazing land, and we have not always done a good job in that. We talk a lot about overgrazing. And again, just listen and then kind of read along. Talk a lot about overgrazing. We'll talk about that throughout the year and the impact that has had on these different environments, not just in the grasses and things that are destroyed, but also the animals that live there. And again, this was said to you in earlier slides, that some of these animals have disappeared or have just been hunted to extinction. Again, continuing, I'm going to go through this kind of fast so I can finish up. And some of the organisms, okay, last point's important. Some of the organisms have adapted to humans and the changes that have made. Okay, they haven't had a chance, or a choice rather. They've just had to do this in order to survive. The ones that could not adapt have just basically disappeared. So, you know, this really goes back to, I think it was chapter 4, and how we talked about how important adaptations are and how important it is to have that gene that makes you able to survive so that you can live in a changing environment. Okay. So again, continuing specifically with the prairies, what are some of the methods that are used? Again, I'm going to go through this quickly. Just watch. Do not need to take notes. Okay, looking at how agriculture has changed the prairies, because even though they weren't intended for agriculture, we are farming them, and the type of farming that's taking place have made a difference, sometimes to help the land, like with crop rotation, sometimes to take away the land, which increases the amount of rotation that, amount of erosion that can occur. So good things and bad things take place. Conservation tillage, here they're growing different crops. Strip farming, we go to contour tillage first. You can see the curve that often helps to prevent erosion, and then strip farming, where you see this kind of patches. These are the same crops, they're just kind of rotating through different bands and different strips, as they call it. Irrigation, depending on how it's done, can help or hurt something. Herbicides can increase the crop yields, but you might know from what we talked about earlier that they would have a negative effect on fish and wildlife. And then we also talked a little bit about how the overuse of fertilizers can hurt the soil. It can hurt mostly, though, the water when the fertilizers leak through into the soil. So irrigation is something that's obviously necessary, but something that might end up hurting what's going on. Okay, I'm probably not going to finish all this. I have about a minute left, so let me just kind of scroll through these. Summer fallowing, leaving the land without a crop is nice. It sounds like a good idea, but it causes soil erosion, salinization. Okay, you've heard this word before. It has to do with the salt. Okay, salt that's become salty does not usually grow other crops well. That's because when farmers sometimes when they let a land field go fallow, that sometimes causes that. And then just very quickly here, the last slide, what can we do? And again, you should in your project present what can be done. Here are some ideas for the grassland people that you can start with, and They're all, you know, some are government things like paying farmers a fair price. Okay, some are things like things the farmers themselves should be doing. Okay, now I know I ran through that quickly. Hopefully you just paid attention to the last part of this. Hopefully you figured out how you could apply this to your slides. Need to stop. Bye.